Welcome to Shop Talk Live, episode number 283. Today, me, Mike, Vic, talking about whether beginning woodworkers should build a workbench or a tool chest first, making sense of the myriad of different finishing supplies and techniques, and last but not least, whether it's ethical to sell a tool that you don't think works the way that it should. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know about two new courses that are in sign up right now in the Fine Woodworking stable of e-learning courses. Dovetail Bootcamp with Bob Van Dyke beginning February 22nd, and SketchUp for Furniture Design with Dave Richards. Both fantastic courses, very popular courses, both instructors that I have learned an immense amount from. So if you're interested in those courses, if you really want to take your dovetails to the next level, or if you really want to master SketchUp and be able to just make your plans as precise and detailed as you see in the magazine, head on over to finewoodworking.com/e-learning. finewoodworking.com/e-learning to find out more information about Dovetail Bootcamp and SketchUp for Furniture Design. All right, on with the show. We're just going to start off with questions because a couple of people complained about not starting with questions, and I'm going to throw them a bone this podcast, and then we'll go back to the normal meandering thoughts next podcast. But this question was like, it came in, and it was like, this has to be Mike and Vic answering this. And this is the part where I check, I'm recording. Yep. Okay. This one's from Mike. After years of being mostly an armchair woodworker and mostly focusing on DIY around the house, I'm finally starting to focus more on woodworking. I've been using a Black & Decker Workmate for a workbench and a combination of Craftsman tool chest and pegboard to hold my tools, but I'd like to eventually replace both by building a proper workbench and tool chest, respectively. Which do you recommend tackling first, both for immediate usefulness and the skills it would teach? He's thinking about both. What are your thoughts? Also, what are your thoughts on wall hung versus floor based tool chests? So both of you are like early fans of Black & Decker Workmates, aren't you?
I still have mine, and that was my primary clamping workbench for a long time because it's like the original twin screw vise, man. You could just like clamp a lot of stuff in there.
Moxon stole that stuff from Black & Decker, man.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely, he did.
That said, if you've already got a place for your tools, even if you don't like it, the workbench has to take precedence over a fancy place to house your tools, right?
Oh, I agree 100%. I think, where you store your tools is of less consequence, I think, than having a good surface to work on.
Yeah.
And you can use that Black & Decker. I know that you can use that Black & Decker bench to make another bench because that's exactly how I did it in my book, shameless plug. And basically it's like, if you don't have a workbench, well, you need something, right? Yeah. I mean, technically you could work on the floor, but that gets a little uncomfortable. So using that Black & Decker, that thing is awesome. And I still have it, and I still use it, from time to time if I'm working in the house or if I'm working somewhere else. It just is so convenient. And so I don't know, I'm not a fancy tool chest guy. And that's just, and again, that doesn't make it right or wrong. It just, I hang stuff on the walls, and I repurpose IKEA furniture that I don't want to use anymore, and I make it into storage. That being said, I love the stuff that Mike's built for his tools. I like, the famous Christian Bexford, wall cabinet. If I had a choice between wall cabinet or tool chest, I have to go wall cabinet, only because I worked out of a traditional 18th century tool chest, or what the world kind of knows now as the anarchist tool chest, except mine wasn't made, centuries later. This was like the real deal from England that I inherited. And I absolutely hated working in it or from it. I found that you're constantly like rifling through things. And like, I just want to be able to blindly turn around, grab, and go back to work. And so for me, if it's hidden or it's in drawers or anything, like in my day-to-day, I would find that aggravating. I don't mind it like when I have to travel to teach. And obviously I have to take my tools in something. I can't just bring the wall, you know, so then I find that it's helpful. But to work out of one all the time, I just don't, it's just not my bag.
Yeah, I think the sort of the anatomy, the structure of the tool chest makes a really big difference. I didn't make a tool chest until I was teaching enough where I got tired of toting around a canvas bag, pulling all the tools out, covering up my entire bench with tools before I could get to work. So I thought, well, let me come up with some little chest where I can carry just my essential tools in. The other thing that was important to me is I never liked this style of tool chest where it had the sliding tills and you had to go down like 3 or 4 strata before you can find what you wanted. So I took that style and I flipped it upside down where I put the sliding tills at the very bottom and called those drawers. And then that big well at the bottom is at the top. And that's like, so when you open the lid, the idea, and I'm exactly with you, Vic, is like any sort of tool storage, if I have to move one tool to get to the tool I want, that's not successful. That's going to drive me crazy. So it's the idea that, okay, what tools do I want? How can I arrange the tools to where I can access them and pull out every single tool I want in one step without multiple things coming out? And the bigger tool chest I had, I do have all of my chisels in a drawer, but like you pull out the drawer and there they all are. That's pretty cool. So I didn't mind that too much. However, I made an even smaller travel tool chest that I could stick in a Pelican case and check it when I fly, because my bigger one, it was
nice.
You know, I was back to my canvas bag when I was traveling. And in that case, even though it's smaller than the first one, I kind of had a little, edited myself a little bit more in the tools I wanted, but I had sort of like in the Dutch tool chest, I had a block in the back with holes in it, so all my chisels stand straight up at the back. So now, even though it's super tiny, you can lift up the lid and access all of my chisels, all of my basically, I think almost everything. You know, I still have odds and ends. I still have 2 drawers in the bottom, which I keep stuff in, but all my go-to stuff, all my layout stuff, all my chisels, everything is accessed in the very top super easily. So I think that's really important. Not traveling, I think that a tool chest is a good idea for someone if you haven't really set up your shop, or if you have to move around a lot, or you have to basically you don't have a stationary place where you can put up a hanging tool cabinet and have it live there all the time. The other thing about a smaller chest is I think that you can carry it with you. You can carry it into the house if you're woodworking in an unconditioned space. And I think it's probably going to keep the rust off of your tools a little bit better just by limiting the airspace and also allowing you to move it into a conditioned space so your tools are never like frozen, and then you start to get all of that condensation on the tools when things warm up a little bit. But I think in each case, a really cool outfitted tool chest and a really cool outfitted wall cabinet, or even just a rack on a wall with magnets on it that gets your tools up and accessible and looks kind of cool. I think the looking kind of cool aspect is important to kind of our experience of woodworking in the shop. You know, it's got to be. And cool doesn't mean fancy, it doesn't mean inlay or mahogany. It just means, it means cool. It's like, oh, that's a good solution. Yeah, even though it took me 5 minutes, it still looks like these tools belong in whatever this little thing is. I like that.
Yeah, and I think the key here though is that what we're saying is that the chest is more for people who are more transient
I would say yes.
in their woodworking, right? So like I like the idea of one to go and teach, as you've indicated as well.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're not settled, because really if you look at the history of these tool chests, I mean, you know, you started off as an apprentice and then you ended up as a journeyman, and then like that's when you needed to move tools from like shop to shop to shop as you did your thing. And then normally once you settled in a spot, right, that you figured, okay, this is where I'm going to be at, then you would have something a little bit better that you could open up and be able to work a little easier. So I've never understood the joy of working out of one of those tool chests. I find that, yes, it's great if you're moving around. And even when I attended Rosewood as a student, I made like a little, well, it wasn't little, it was actually quite large, but basically it was a big box on wheels that had 2 banks of drawers, like the plywood, you know, with the sliding things. And then I also had a board that would lean up against a rack holder, and my planes would sit on that. And so it made it so that now things are a little bit easier to get to as a student, because I wasn't there forever. I mean, I had eventually moved on. But yeah, I think that's the key. I think if you're a transient at all, for whatever reason, whether it's like you have to move tools in and out of the house because of conditions, or whether or not you teach, or whether or not you go on courses, and I think then the chest is good. Otherwise, I like it on the wall. Doesn't take any footprint.
Yeah, and the problem always is that anytime you increase the storage area for tools, like I have my wall cabinet, then I have my travel chest out, and that's on a rolling base, so I'm not bending down to get into it. But because I have those 2 things available to me, they all get filled up with tools. So now it's like, yeah, that was my travel chest, and I put all my good tools into the travel chest when I teach, and I come back, and it's that sort of pulling the tools, the ceremony of taking the tools from the travel chest and hanging them back on the wall. That was like, okay, now I'm back home for a while. And now it's just like, yeah, but my good chisels, they just live in the travel chest. And this just lives here. And, so now it's this mixed economy to where I'm kind of working out of both. But again, having it up high, having it on wheels, having it organized to where I can pull out a drawer and get my chisels, or lift it up and get out my hammer. Yeah.
Well, you even called the intermediate, or that travel tool chest, the first one, the essential tool chest.
Yeah.
And that was the tools that you needed everywhere you went.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got 87 million tools. Yeah, but what do you really need?
Yeah.
What needs to go in here? So yeah.
Also for me, like when I'm looking at Mike's perspective, question asker Mike, they're just getting going, so I think a wall hanging tool cabinet is one of those things that should maybe wait until you really know the kind of work you're doing and the tools you're going to need to do that work. And you've been collecting tools for a while too, and then
and purging tools as well.
Sure, absolutely, yeah,
because it's up and down, right?
Absolutely, and I actually had dreams of, I can't figure, right there having a wall hung tool chest, and I can't see spending the time to do it because A, it's like I'd rather be building other things right now, but B, like Vic said, I've been purging tools left and right as I hone in on what the work is I do more. And had I made that 5 years ago, or had I made a wall hanging tool cabinet 5 years ago, it would be half empty, and the things that I use every day might not fit in it.
Right.
And then another aspect that I would actually think about is that a tool cabinet, tool chest, whatever, that's a great class to take if you can, and I don't see any wall hanging tool cabinet classes out there these days. I see, Mike, you teach your tool chest.
This Megan, August coming up in Connecticut, we're doing the smaller of the travel chests, which is my favorite chest. So
Shameless plug meter. Ding,
Bing.
ding. But I think that that's a great class to take. There's a lot of joinery to learn. When he asks, which do you recommend tackling first, both for immediate usefulness and the skills it would teach, there's probably more applicable skills in a tool chest than a workbench. But a workbench you're always going to use. You know?
Yeah.
Even one day, if you build your fancy workbench you've always dreamed of, like your first workbench can be over there with a drill press on it or something like that. You know, it's always going to be applicable.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned the travel chest and the skills. It's sort of like that's a tradition of the journeyman's tool chest. You go out on your own, you build your tool chest, and that was kind of your calling card. So it had all of your joinery. It was an example of your craftsmanship that you kind of carried with you, which I think is kind of cool. So it is nice if a tool chest does have a certain level of skill and craftsmanship invested into it. That's kind of a neat thing as well. So, Vic, you talked about starting with a workmate and then building a bench. Then the next question is, okay, what's your first real bench? So the two answers are I'll just say my typical answer is don't build your dream bench yet. Get a bench up and running that's not going to break you, that isn't going to create a stumbling block to woodworking. Like, person who has 800 pounds of Rubo bench parts and hardware in their basement, keeping them from building some storage cabinets in the laundry room. That's going to be a great bench, but until it is, you're depriving yourself of getting up and running. So I'll say, start with something easy. Or is that easy home center weekend bench with a cast iron vise, does that become the 6-inch jointer where once you have it, you're going to be stuck with that for like a really, really long time? Like how do you judge the ease of getting into it, getting up and running versus something that you really want to be living at and using for a decent amount of time without compromising the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mike, because I find that everybody wants to go like the Rubo was a fine example. When I was working for Veritas, we would go down to all of these woodworking shows and we would see the same people kind of every year. And it's like, you'd see the same guy like 3 years in a row and he'd be like, yeah, so I got the third leg on my Rubo installed this year. And it's oh boy, awesome. Good for you. And, it's so difficult to make. And then meanwhile, you can knock together a Nicholson, style bench really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And you don't have to get yourself bogged down in vices and don't have to spend $500 on this vise and this, vise and all that other stuff, because the whole bench is designed to be like a work surface on the front, on the top, the whole 9 yards. So you can get a workbench built, even with sort of fledgling skills in a pretty short amount of time. If you look at some of the more difficult ones, like the Rubo, for example, that joinery is not for the faint of heart. Right. What I mean? You got a sliding dovetail shaped tenon and then a regular tenon beside it. And then you're working with whatever thickness of material that they're prescribing. And it's that's not easy for the most experienced woodworker, let alone a newbie. And so, the first bench I made so when I graduated Rosewood, I got invited to work at Ron Barter's shop, who's the owner of the school now. And he kind of treated that as an incubator. I would work for him for 8 hours a week, and then the rest of the time was my own time to develop and do my thing. And so I built I think it's called the hybrid workbench that Mike Fortune had done in the magazine. It was like modern hybrid or something like that. It was basically a riff off of a traditional European style bench, but it had a metal vise on the front, and it still had the sliding tail vise, which again, sliding tail vise seems like a pretty simple thing to do.
Yeah.
But it isn't. I mean, the core of that vise has to be milled to such precision. Otherwise, the thing doesn't work very well.
Right.
And I learned that the hard way. And so then learned that I don't like working on that style of bench. And so, you could get into that situation where you build like the ultimate whatever based on, who's got the most Instagram likes. And then you work on that bench for a month and go, I don't like this.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not necessarily satisfying the way you work. And you don't know how you work because you're just starting out. And so it's like, that's a really good piece of advice. Don't go for the dream whatever.
Yeah.
Same with the tool cabinet. Like Ben was saying, if he built that tool cabinet 5 years ago, the thing would be in complete sort of disarray because things that he thought he needed, he doesn't need, and things that he does need are not fitting in there. And it's like, because we all do this, right? As beginners, we like buy, and then like it kind of peters out, and then you're like, oh, I got too much stuff, I don't need this, and then sell, until you're like, you got a pocket knife. So it's like,
I don't know what that sell part is. I get the buy. Oh, shoot, I'm going to shove this in this drawer over here so I have room for this. And now I have this plus the drawers plus boxes of stuff.
Yeah. I got out of that because like I couldn't like fit it. And so I know lots of people that do that, but it's like I'm relentless when it comes to paring down. Like if I see that a tool has a bunch of dust on it, that tells me I'm not using it very much. And then I wonder, can I get away with that without having that in the shop? And I'm relentless about it. So, I mean, I don't even I would think that if I were to look at my tools, like how many of the tools do I have now that I started with? That would be an interesting exercise to see what actually has stood the test of time versus what has been replaced or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess the short answer is don't build a fancy workbench, but build it first. And if you're not transient, look for some sort of wall storage. But if you are transient, a chest might be a good thing to look at.
Yeah, I would say for me, the minimum criteria for that next level workbench beyond a workmate is it needs to be sturdy enough to where if you're hand planing, it's not racking all over the place. I think you need some sort of a front vise, even a cast iron vise with a wooden jaw. Ideally with that inner jaw built into an apron. I know I'm starting to get a little bit fancy here, but basically a sturdy table either with a cast iron vise or make a Moxon style twin screw vise that you can clamp to your tabletop. So then maybe you have a pretty sturdy work table, and then it's just about maybe adding some stops or dog holes and then making a twin screw vise that you can clamp onto it. I think there's probably a lot of ways into it, but I think it starts with a sturdy, stable work surface, I guess. I think that would probably be that minimum primary criteria, and then you can work with that.
I mean,
agree.
It's if you're just looking to get to work, and I think people don't think about it often enough, but attaching or building a workbench into the wall gives you sturdy because it's part of the wall, part of the structure, not going to rack. I made my wall bench in like 3 or 4 hours, and that was enough to get me going to finish out the rest of it because everything was built on that bench then, and it certainly has its issues, and I'm glad it's not my only bench. It's hard hand planing. It's too narrow. Sometimes, if you're shooting or using a shooting board, it's a problem. But it allowed me to not utilize only a Black & Decker, workmate, to get everything around it done. And it's always going to prove to be useful to me. So
cool.
That's another good option.
Cool.
All right, let's move on to Fred's question. I have a question regarding finishing. With wiping varnish and shellac and oils and hard wax finishes, what type of applicator brush, cotton pad, rag, if rag, cotton, wool, linen, microfiber, Scotch-Brite. There are so many choices that it can be mind-numbing at times. Any help would be appreciated. So I think at the heart of it is I think Fred's overwhelmed with the finishing options and what applicator to use with each of them. But do either of you have like, well, first off, I've never used hard wax finish. Have you, y'all?
So we're talking like a Osmo sort of thing,
Yeah,
where it's
right?
a
Monocoat,
oil wax finish. I don't know if Rubio Monocoat's the same thing. I don't know if there's a wax content to that, or that's just a different sort of low VOC kind of oil-based finish.
It is. Vic?
No, I don't think it's considered a hard wax oil, but it's like one of the sort of, kind of common ones that you're seeing a lot of time for hand application these days.
Yeah. I think that, the type of finish is going to dictate the application for the most part, but then also the type of finish result you want with that finish will also dictate the application. For instance, shellac is something that can be brushed on with great skill and experience to good success, or it can be brushed on with zero skill and experience to horrid results. And you can, build up a French polish with shellac with great skill, or you can have a very simple wipe-on shellac finish followed up with steel wool and wax, which is dead simple, really easy, really versatile, and really quick. So, and all those things are going to require different application methods. So I really think it's the finish. And then within that finish, what sort of application method? Again, varnish is something where you can brush on, you can thin it down, you can wipe it on, and then you start to mix oils and varnishes together, and you have to understand what's happening at the sort of the chemical level, how it's curing, which is going to dictate how it's applied as well. And then you also need to know something like a pure oil finish, like linseed oil, or what do they call it, a hard wax finish. Both of those aren't really building up a film, in which case your surface prep is far different for a very almost non-film forming finish than your surface prep is going to be for a brushed on lacquer or sprayed on lacquer or varnish finish, where the finish is super thick. So, yeah, that's like a lifetime. I would say the very best thing you can do.
You're screwed, Fred.
Sorry, Fred. Is learn one finish using one application method. And then if you want to introduce a second finish or a second application method for a different result of that first finish, that's good too. But I think if you try to start with a billion finishes, a billion application methods, which is what happens if you start to Google wood finishing, it's like, where do you even start? So where would you start, Vic? Okay, I'm a woodworker. How many finishes do I need to know? How many application methods do I need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mike. It's so, and I think he's clearly overwhelmed, and quite frankly, I'm overwhelmed because there is so many different methods and application styles, and even just for one single product, there's so many different ways that you can apply it, and some people swear by doing it, with with an abrasive pad. Other people say, no, don't use an abrasive pad, use this. And so I think a lot of what has to do with finishing is that you kind of have to, I always start with, what does the manufacturer recommend as far as application methods go? And then I try it on a test board, and then I make some notes, and I say, okay, did I like the way this worked? Did it do what I needed it to do? And then kind of go from there. I think if you don't make notes, and you don't sort of like do some experimentation, regardless of what the advice is with the finish, I think you're going to run into problems. Some people like patting on shellac, other people don't. I like brushing on a few layers of shellac, cutting it back, and then patting on a couple of coats just to make sure everything's nice and flat and smooth and all that other stuff. That's just what I do.
Wait, hang on. Let's. When you say cutting it back, can you dive into that? Expound on
so
that a little bit.
So I'll put a few coats on with a brush, which always tend to leave a little bit of a less desirable surface, right? But it builds it up fairly quick. And then I just take a sanding pad and I sand it back so that it is like there's no ridges, there's no low spots, right? And you can see them right away because they're the only shiny areas.
Yeah.
And then I will pad on a couple of layers that are super thin, but then are going to fill all the scratch marks from the sanding that I did. And then normally I'll then do some wax, and I'll use a 4-knot steel wool or equivalent in the pads to just, rub that in, gives a nice consistent sheen, and everything is good. So I think that should be your first stop in the finishing wonderland, right? Because it's a technique that has been tried and true for, 1,000 years. So they've been doing that same thing over and over and over again. And so everything that we're seeing nowadays, these fancy like monocoat mixtures and the Osmo stuff and the Livos and all that other stuff, like that's all just chemistry at its best. And Mike's right. Like in order to understand how every one of those finishes is working, you literally have to get into understanding the chemical properties. Is it a coalescing finish? Is it does it burn into itself? All of these things that are just like mind-numbingly boring from my point of view, because it's like, I don't care. I want to woodwork. I want to just not even put finish on anything and just see how it goes. Like I just don't care. And so, the for me, the shellac wax situation is an awesome place to start. But then if you want a certain look, so if you want that sort of modern, Danish modern look that everybody is doing, and I don't dislike it or like it, I think there's a time and place for those finishes. And that's the key. There's a time and place for those finishes. So then, like, we used to just use good old-fashioned water locks. Like, that's what I was exposed to when I was at Rosewood, is like just a tung oil, a polymerized tung oil that would give you the look of an oil, but would also build very slowly so that you could control it and all that other kind of stuff. And then now you have two of them. Now you have something to use on the insides of boxes, which is critical, right? You don't put oil on the inside of a box or else it stinks for its entire lifetime. And so there's, but yeah, I think there's so many application methods, so many ways. Certain companies sell application tools to sell that you know what I mean? That you don't really need them, right? So then you always got to follow the money, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but like you got to are they making money on these applicators? And so do you absolutely need a lamb's wool, virgin first trimming of the lamb's fur, like applicator brush and like all this other stuff? It's like,
now that you mention it, of course I do.
So I mean, it's if you can figure out how to put shellac onto something and then put a coat of wax on it, like you are way further ahead than if you try to like get your brain around all of these application methods and all that other stuff. And I feel like, there's too much out there. And the finishing world, I don't know if you would agree with this, Mike, or not, but I think the finishing world is pretty cryptic.
I don't intentionally
necessarily.
So. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
they don't tell you what's
involved.
in it. Yeah. They don't tell you what's in it. They don't tell you like exactly what it is. Something could be called a varnish. Well, what does that mean? Is it got more oil than resin? Does it have more resin than oil? So is it long or short? Like, it's like really hard to figure out. Like, at least with the FDA and food, they got to tell you what's in it.
Yes.
But they can't, but they don't have to with finish. And so your guess is as good as mine. There are tests to help you. And that, like, I really like that Flexner book, Understanding Finishes, because it really is like a textbook that, you can kind of filter through and look at charts and try to figure out what you want to do. But Yeah, I don't know. And every woodworker is going to be different. Every woodworker's like, you should use this and just this because of that. And it's like, it's all just personal opinion, I think. Technically, you could put black trim clad high gloss on everything and just be done with it.
This is true. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Vic. I think if you get a very simple wiped on shellac finish under your belt and a wiping varnish under your belt, that's basically what I've done, and it tackles really 99% of everything I do. So shellac for small stuff, varnish for big stuff, varnish over shellac if I need extra protection on a small piece. You can mix and match those a little bit. However, I've never built a ukulele. Are there other finishing concerns once you get into instruments? Because I know that's like its own black art as well.
Well, yeah, and I'm not at a point to speak expertly on that subject, but that kind of brings up one thing that, you got to ask yourself, Fred, is like, what are the expectations? If you're building federal furniture and you want a highly polished surface, then a lot of these methods are going to be not right. The reason why French polish was so popular was it was the only thing really available then, but you could polish it. You could polish shellac to a highly polished reflective surface. And I think that one reason why polyurethane became so popular is you could get that thing with less skill. And the look is a little different. It's more of a thicker film finish, but you could get that highly reflective gloss finish easier. For me, I always wiped on thinned down polyurethane for the longest time because when I'm finishing, my first rule is do no harm if you can, so like if you're building up a finish slowly, you get there slower, but you could at every step along the way, see where you are, My only problems that I've ever had finishing in the past 5 years have been when I am going for a very specific look. And I'm not getting that look, But when you're starting off, you're wanting to make the wood look good. You want to protect it. Go simple. Just go simple. And if you're looking for a highly polished finish that isn't thick looking, then you're looking at French polishing, and you got to start practicing way before you're done with that piece, and like that is a big aspect of the look of a piece. So if you're looking for a specific thing, sometimes there's no way around it. But yeah. What kind of cloths do y'all have lying around? I just have like a piece of a t-shirt most of the time with some cotton balls in it for everything. I have one with for wiping on varnish, and then I have one for shellac.
Yeah, I mean that's about. And this is not a plug or anything, but I wrote a couple articles for Fine Woodworking. One was on success using a wiping varnish, and another one was talking about a simple shellac finish. And both of those are the techniques that I've basically come to use over 30 years of woodworking because it works for me, and also over the last dozen years of teaching because it works for the students. And the idea is that it isn't that there's not enough information on finishing. There's just way too much without context. So if you start there, they're going to give you two methods to talk about the exact product, the exact application, and with the expectation of what it's going to look like. And again, whether it's those articles, whether it's an article or a video by someone else, that notion of learning a finish, a technique, start to finish, and get it to where it looks like you like it or the way you think it's supposed to look, and now you have a context to start to branch out and expand from there. But yeah, I'm like you. I buy those boxes of rags, so I'm just looking for lint-free cotton rags, and for shellac, I will stick some sort of wadding inside to create a very crude sort of pad. I'll have those super cheap paint brushes that I can use and throw away if I'm slopping on a kind of a a wiping varnish over a large surface, I'll brush it on and wipe it all off. And then I'll use foam brushes where I'm really looking to have a clean, accurate, brushed-on finish, because then I can still throw the foam brush away afterwards, too. I'm just not a proponent of ever cleaning my brushes. I prefer to just throw them away.
Yeah, I run into the same issue with brushes where I have some very expensive, virginal badger wool, whatever, like coffee, first crack, it's like first shave. And they're great. They're lovely brushes, but yeah, then you're cleaning them and everything else. And to be quite honest, I found that with the type of finish that you were talking about, Mike, like the wipe on, I find like a low nap or a foam roller, allows me to get it on super quick, because I'm not really worried about brush strokes, right? We just want to wipe it off and, let it sit and then wipe it off.
Right.
But yeah, same stuff. The white t-shirt material. I've had a piece of t-shirt material about a square foot folded up into a square about this big that lives in a glass jar, and it's completely saturated with
linseed oil,
with shellac.
Okay.
No, with shellac.
No.
And that, like, I pull that out, and it's still liquid because it's airtight.
Yeah.
And I've been patting on shellac with that for probably 10 years.
Yes.
Every once in a while, I open it up and I like refold it so that I've got like a nice clean area. But that's been my big fancy, what they call a rubber, that I've used for 10 years. And so again, I think you can, on top of the finish, you can kind of blow your brains out trying to figure that out. And then the same thing with application. And it's like I use blue paper towel to buff out a lot of waxes, right? Because it's got just enough tooth that I feel like it's doing something. Yeah. There's also, I always kind of joke in Canada, because we have here we have the LCBO, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, and they have these really thick craft paper bags that they put the alcohol in when you go and you buy it. And that stuff is awesome for rubbing finishes out, because again, it's got enough tooth. So the joke is, of course, I got to go every week to get those bags, because, if I don't have those bags, I can't finish anything. And so, but yeah, like just the very, very basics, those throwaway brushes that you're talking about, those are fantastic. I like the foam brushes, although I will say that I've tried using like dollar store brand foam brushes, and they're not quite the same. They seem to disintegrate and fall apart, and then now you're aggravated because you've got chunks of foam in places. So I will go to an actual paint store and get like, you pay like $1 per brush instead of $1. Yeah, instead of $1 for 40 of them. So there's certain things that I'll cheap out on, but that's not one of them.
Cool.
But yeah, and I mean, I think then we don't even have to get into spraying, because that's like next levels, production level, kind of stuff. The other option is to say to hell with it all and just farm it out.
Which is legit.
Farm out the finishing, which is totally legit. Lots of people do it.
There's a reason why it's a whole career, because there's a lot to it.
How many years has Terry been doing it? I mean, I think 30 years she's been a professional finisher. So like,
and when you sit there
I would
and
never do it
analyze,
because I enjoy having the control.
But when you analyze what a professional finisher does, it's not just slapping a finish on like a lot of us tend to do. There is a whole different craft there.
I just want to clarify really quick, because Vince, when you were talking about keeping a rag in a jar, I knew you were going to say shellac, because that's a valid thing to do. And I said, is it linseed oil? It says it's soaked in linseed oil. I want to clarify, that's like a really, really bad idea to put a linseed oil soaked rag in any enclosed container. It's really bad. It's going to catch on fire. It just will. So I want to be super clear that was meant to be a really dumb statement, not a suggestion for anybody else out there.
Now, you know what, Mike, when I was a student at Rosewood, we were told that, right? Don't ever ball up a rag with oil in it and just throw it in the trash because it can cause problems. And so we're like, really? How is that even a thing? Like being completely ignorant of like, you know, chemistry and how all of that works. So we had a can, like a fire can in the shop where those sorts of rags would go. And those would they would get hung up first until they dried. And then they would go in the fire can, right? And then on garbage day, they would get balled up and then taken outside. But so of course we were working late one night because we were able to do that as students. And so we did an experiment. So we took a linseed soaked rag, balled it up, and threw it in the fire can. And I think it was within 30 minutes, the can was smoking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is real. This is a real thing, right? And so that's why I knew you were making a dumb statement, so I didn't jump in. But like I always tell people, like, do not mess around with that. That's not a, you know, kind of frug around and find out situation.
Yeah.
That is like, that's for real. That will happen.
Yeah, because it's not going to happen right away. It's going to happen 5 hours later when you're in bed and the shop lights are shut off. And serious thing.
Yeah, and then that's not cool.
My wife's uncle had it happened with steel wool. Because he's a professional box maker, and his final thing is, I think, linseed oil mixture, whatever, rubbed on and buffed out with steel wool. And he put the steel wool on top of the plastic container of linseed oil and came back the next day, and it had melted through the top of the container and thankfully extinguished itself when it fell into the liquid.
Hit the oil.
But like, that's an moment, you know? So that's, I always like to add, you know, anything with linseed oil that is hiding pockets of the material. Yeah. So steel wool or even a Scotch-Brite pad could very well go as well. So
for sure.
All right. So I have a very, very, very stupid all-time favorite tool of all time for this week. And it is, I can't do the mirror thing. It's behind my right shoulder. And I actually stole this from Michael Fortune, who leaves for him, it is a empty bag that water softening salt came in. He leaves it slung over the back of his bandsaw so that his scraps can just fall off the table into this bag hanging off the back of his bandsaw. And then that is fire starter material for him in the house. And I saw that, and all of a sudden it clicked, and I said, that's what I've been hanging on to the chicken feed bags for. Because when you buy chicken feed, it's like in these nice Tyvek bags.
Yes. And
I cannot bear to throw them out. Because, like, I read that Dick Proennke book one time, and, like, now I can't throw away metal chainsaw cans, gas cans, and I can't throw away these bags because they'll come in handy for something. And if I ever need to build a shelter, now I have these, or whatever. But the other day, I was going around, and I normally have a bin filled with scrap just sitting there with the lid off, and I just throw the scrap in there. And that got full, and I started to need to organize it a little bit and stockpile it throughout the year so that when it is winter and we're heating with the wood stove, I have it. And those chicken feed bags or whatever extra bags you have lying around, dog food bags, hang on to them. It's a good place to store scrap, and you won't be precious about them.
Cool.
So
that's cool because we go through like big bags of dog food with Bruno.
Yeah.
And so like that's a real smart idea, and they're super strong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As are water softening bags from Michael Fortune.
There you go.
Cool. What you got, Vic?
Yeah.
Well, I've been doing some experimentation recently with unconventional bench types. And so I kind of that workbench thing was kind of an interesting conversation to have. But I've been experimenting with. So I I have fully drank the Festool Kool-Aid, and I have the different, because of the system and the whole 9 yards. Like I'm almost embarrassed to admit it. I'm certainly not that guy on the forum that it lists all of his Festool tools that he has in his sign-off, because I'm like, I can't do that. I'm like embarrassed. I am embarrassed to tell people I own Festool, because then like, oh, well, isn't that nice for you?
You have a Festool radio behind you right there.
Well, and I mean, yeah, yeah, I can't even listen to a regular radio. I got, anyway. And so I've drank the Kool-Aid. Great. Judge me however you want. I don't care. But the interesting thing is that I've been, ever since working with that style of tool, using an MFT, right, a multifunction table, which has the matrix of holes in it, and then the sort of affiliated work holding stuff and things like that, I found to be really interesting. And like when you need to like hold a piece of wood from two ends in order to route something on it, or you need to put like a fence down on a multiple set of pieces and then run a router over it or whatever, the work holding just like it's different from traditional hand tool work holding, right? And so I've been sort of like, okay, this works really well in a lot of cases with the power tools. How is it? Could I employ the same work surface with hand tools? And so the initial finding was no, because an MFT is not designed to be strong, right? It does rack all over the place if you're trying to do like repetitive motions like sawing or planing or anything like that. Also, there's no support in the middle of the table. So if you start like hammering down on something, you get some serious bouncing going on. And so that's no good. But then I discovered another surface that is made in the UK that basically has gusseting on the inside of it that allows it to remain flatter. And so I've been playing with this, like trying to see, do I need a quote unquote traditional workbench? Or can I work with a more modern sort of system? And so the jury's out still, because it's still too new. It's only been about a month or whatever. But so far, it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting approach. It makes owning a workbench and making a workbench a little easier, because the hard part of the top and the aprons is already taken for you. You just have to build the base for it. And so it's like an actual wooden joineried bench base, whereas like an MFT that you buy that's commercial is just designed to go into the back of a truck and then set up in a place. Right. So it's just been an interesting sort of experiment in, can you do these sort of more modern bench holding and work holding and that sort of thing, and still be able to work in a traditional manner on these surfaces. And so it's
so no vise at the moment?
No vise.
Okay.
No vise. Everything is done with this style of clamp.
Okay.
Right,
yeah.
Which is like the track clamp that they use for a Festool track, and it threads into a hole and then clamps down. And those holes are on the top and on the other side.
I could totally see going that way. I love the concept of the MFT top and everything. If I added a vise, because I think that quick loosening and tightening as you're moving stuff. But I'll be curious to see what your final conclusion is. Yeah.
Yeah, the vise thing is definitely a lot faster. The only thing that I have a little bit of a beef with vices in general, in that they live in one corner of my bench, and what if I'm doing something else there and can't access the vise, then I'm mad because I got to move stuff around to get to the vise. And it seems like a trivial thing, but I just find that vices are always in the wrong spot for where I want to use them. Mm-hmm. And so with that, So my workbench before this was a variation of a Nicholson with a Moxon that I would put on there and use when I needed to, but otherwise no vices. So I've been working vice free for maybe 2 years. And so I haven't really noticed missing it. And so again, just I play with these things. Like
it's
you know
fun
what
to experiment.
I have fun with it, and I look for ways, like, you know what I mean? Sometimes, you know, as we already talked about, sometimes making a workbench can seem like a big daunting task, especially if you go into a, you know, the big, you know, the ones that all the books are written about. You know, so I'm looking for ways to like get people to gain entry, because I spend a lot of time teaching those people, right? The people who are just getting started, right? I'm not, I leave like Mike to do like the high end stuff, right? I want to get people in the door. You know what I mean? I want them to start with me and then 3 years later go take a class with Mike because he's doing this like super awesome case, or he's doing, you know what I mean? Like this joinery that just blows your mind. So I want to get people in the door, right? And so this sort of experimentation allows me to sort of play with it and see how I get people in.
Yeah, I mean,
and sometimes 17th century benches are not the way to convince people to get into woodworking.
Yeah, I think any way you can lower that barrier of entry into the craft is great, whatever that means. So I'm a huge proponent of, I don't care what style, what methodology, what tools you're using. If someone can come in and make something and have success, that's the best thing we can do to get anyone hooked on this craft. Because once you're hooked, we got you for life. That's easy. But yeah, let's get you in the door.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
What you got, Mike?
Nothing good.
Huh?
Nothing good. I was gonna say something, but I realized it's probably like about the stupidest, unnecessary thing to say. I was gonna say, you know, when you're woodworking, be sure to, you know, you have your camera and your phone, just, you know, record, you know, all of your setups as you're going. It's just like, duh. That's like every single person on Instagram.
It's not like duh. The other day I had to clamp something and I'm sitting there going, wait, how did I clamp this last time? Because none of my clamps were reaching exactly. And thank goodness I went scrolling through Instagram and I had to like go in my stories because I don't actually post to the timeline very much. But like I had to go in my stories and find the shot of me clamping the thing saying, thank goodness I had this thing lying around. And it was like, oh, there it is. That's right.
Yes. Yeah, that is a little sad and embarrassing. Like I had to go back and watch a video workshop I recorded like 5 years ago to see how I made something. It's like, oh, that's
I do that all the time. I go into my book that I wrote. I'm like, how did I do that? It's not just you guys, it's everybody.
So that's my technique, is just either record video workshops or write books on your processes in case you need to go back and revisit methods. Yeah.
I like that idea, Mike. I do it all the time with my phone. I just wish I was better at filing those photos away in a way that made it like, I want to be able to be just like, hey Siri, show me the glue up I did for, you know, whatever. And she's like, no problem, Vic. Boom. But that doesn't happen. No. So it's like, I wish I was more fastidious about like putting it into a folder called glue up setup or, you know, whatever. But I'm not. I just take pictures and then I'm like, trying to find it.
I'll be teaching a course, and it's like I'm going to do really good about recording and photographing every single setup through the week. And I think I did a pretty good job, and I'll go back to a course, and like there's 1 5-second video of cutting a dovetail on a table saw, and that's it. Like the rest of the week is like gone. It's like, well, I already know how to do that. That didn't help.
So can I give you a tip I've used that seems to work is I don't know if you're running iPhone or what, but like I can go into the location because you can search by location.
Oh, yeah.
And this is really extreme, but I remember I did something in a course I was teaching in Australia. So I literally went on the map and like scrolled in. It's like, okay, yes, I was in Footscray. That's where I was. there it is, right? So if you can use the location as a way to sort of bookmark things, that's worked really well for me. But
27 pictures of
the struggle's real.
kangaroos. It's like, well, that doesn't do me any
Here's
good.
Vic petting a what are those things called? Koala bears. Yes, oh my God, they're all trying to save the koala bears, but they're really just a useless animal. I mean, they just
Oh no!
they don't do anything. They don't contribute anything. All they do is eat and poop.
Vic, you just turned into the bad
They're like
guy.
babies. That'll get some mail.
Save the
It's not about
koalas.
woodworking. And they stink. Koalas stink.
They think we smell.
Koalas think we smell?
I don't know.
I don't know how they're smelling anything. It's like they're like a thing of Vicks Vapo Rub. I don't.
Oh,
Anyway,
that makes sense.
there's your
Because they eat
non-woodworking content.
What they eat, the eucalyptus tree leaves? Is that
Yeah.
the thing? Okay.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
they smell
they
like
just
Vicks
stink.
Vapor.
That's all they smell of. Yeah.
Huh. I kind of like Vicks though. All right.
You can't even eat a koala bear. Like it'd be like eating Vicks Vapo
I just
Rub.
want
You
to
can't.
shove it under my nose when I'm congested. That's all. I just want to keep one around.
That
just
you
to-
could do with it.
Okay. This is getting really
Except for
weird.
that they're jerks and they'll rip your face off.
Oh, okay. Well, problem
Yeah.
solved.
So there's that.
Let's do a quick answer. One more question, quick answer. And this one is from Baron. My question is it ethical to sell a junk tool? I don't know how we're going to do this quick. I'm sorry, folks. For instance, if a saw has a fence that can't be relied on or a table that won't align, should an ethical woodworker foist this tool-like object onto a new woodworker? I've been there.
Full
think it
disclosure,
was-
that's the key.
I think it was giving the tool away, but and it was to a friend who I knew was, of sound mind. And I was able to say to him, "Hey, you got to know this." But I can't think of that many tool-like objects that were just defective tools that I felt were unsafe. And this is like my old horrible beginner table saw. And but I get it. I get the ethical question here. I just don't think that I can come up with that many instances where it's been a problem for me. Maybe I have no ethics. So. What do you think, Vic?
I think you got to be upfront. If you're selling something that's got a bum fence, you got to say, listen, this, here's this saw. The fence sucks.
Price as
you know,
such.
As is, priced as such. So I'm in a situation right now where I've got one of these small canister style dust collection things. There's like a little 1 horsepower thing that sits on top of a metal can, and it's loud as all get.
Yes. I think I have the same one.
It is ear bleedingly loud. Makes the DeWalt 735 sound like a whisper.
Wow.
And a friend of mine asked about selling it to him, and I'm like, no, I won't do that to you because it's just not worth it. But I will eventually sell it. I just haven't had the time to put it up on Craigslist or whatever we're calling that nowadays. But I will warn somebody. Listen, this thing rocks at like 90 decibels.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this is a screamer, right? But I'll price it accordingly. And it's like, if you want it, you've been warned. And that's basically how it goes. I would never, just out of my own sort of character, I would never sell something to somebody that I know that there's something wrong with it and not disclose that. Like, I couldn't sleep at night knowing that I did that, because what if it's a table saw thing and the fence is, reliably toes in for whatever reason, and you can't adjust it, or I couldn't make it work. Like, What if that person had an accident on that saw and cut off a finger? Like, how do you live with that?
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't, you know? So it's one of those things where I think, yeah, like if you knowingly sell something to somebody that is in poor repair or is dangerous or any of those things, yeah, I think that's not a very ethical thing to do. So I personally wouldn't do it, but I know there's lots of people that would. And we hear stories all the time of buying something that wasn't as represented, sometimes by private sellers, sometimes by large corporations. It happens, but I personally wouldn't do it.
Yeah, it's tough when you're starting out because economics can be a very, very big issue. I get that. And it's like, okay, well, this is something cheap. But then I think you have to weigh that against, even if something isn't overtly dangerous, if it's like, I sell this to you and you use it, I know you're going to have problems with it to where you're going to be frustrated and you're not doing good work, you know, and that's just sort of working against that whole thing about getting people interested in the craft. So yeah, I think that I'm honestly, I'm not in that position very often. You know,
because you don't sell anything, you just buy.
Yeah, you just put it in a new drawer.
I'm just say where I'm at now, for the most part, is very stable. Nothing coming in, nothing going out. So, yeah, I think for me that kind of goes along the lines of I have a lot of students saying, "Hey, I can do this. Should I buy this?" And then it's really easy. It's like, no, forget it. Don't get that. So, but then again, you have to weigh that against, well, what should I get? You know, what is a good economical way to get into something? And then there's usually an answer. It's like a podcast answer. It's like, you want to know if you should buy this. The answer is no. The real answer is like 14 different things, you know, that are far different than this. It's like, well, let's get to the root of the problem, what you want to do. There's other ways around it than buying a cheap version of this particular tool. So.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even you think about a hand plane, right? Like a metal hand plane. If you bought a hand plane on Craigslist or something, and it shows up and you try it out and you realize that the sole isn't flat, right? And it's not flat to the point where it can't be corrected, right? Do you sell that? Do you just like, oh, well, I got screwed, so I'm just going to like pass that on to the next person, right? Like I've had that happen where like or it wasn't as represented. It said it was a type 11, but it wasn't when it arrived, and the photos were wrong and all that other stuff. And it's like, so then I just say, listen, great parts plane.
Right.
Here it is.
Yeah. Like to me, a hand plane's not a safety issue. So I think it's a lot easier to justify passing it along. But
would you do it?
You know, I think I would say like the sole's not flat, and
so you disclose it.
I would disclose that the sole isn't flat, and knowing that if somebody wants to spend like 10 hours flattening the sole, that's up to them, you know, and then encourage the person, if it's in person, to look at the flatness of the sole or whatever. The example that I was thinking of, it was a table saw that, like, if you use the miter gauge, it was just dangerous. The miter gauge system was just straight up dangerous. And I think it was one of those things where I told the guy, I was like, listen, the fence is good, you know, if you got to use it for ripping or whatever, but this thing is pointless, you know, don't. And I priced it as such, or no, I gave it to him. But yeah, the flat sole is a really good example. But yeah, if it's sold to you as a type 11 and you discover it's not a type 11, you can't pass it off to the next person as a type 11. Doesn't matter what the eBay listing you got was, you know?
Right.
Yeah. I almost look at it like a car, you know, if you're selling a car, disclose what's going on with it. Buyer beware. If it is a buyer beware situation too, I guess, you know. So. Well, that does it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Thanks again to Mike and Vic for joining me. And thank you especially to Jeff Rose for expertly putting this podcast together for me while I'm on the road. I'm currently up in New Hampshire filming a new video workshop with the one and only Dan Fea that will be coming to Unlimited members in the coming months, we'll say. If you want more information on Dovetail Bootcamp or SketchUp for furniture design, head on over to findwoodworking.com/elearning. If you have any questions you'd like answered on the show, please send them in to shoptalk@taunton.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Bye.
Buy. Sell.
That's like its own black art as well.